Okay. Hello, welcome. It's International Women's Day, so happy International Women's Day all. Please be advised that this session is being shared on Facebook Live starting now, and the session is also going to be recorded. If you have any questions or comments throughout the session, please use the chat function on either Zoom or Facebook. So this is our second Your Brain Health get-together, and this is where we gather to talk about women's brain health. And my name is Julie Ireton. I'm a senior investigative reporter at CBC here in Ottawa, sometimes moonlight as a volunteer in my community for important events like this one. If you joined our January 26th webinar, you heard Dr. Nafisa Ismail from the University of Ottawa, and she spoke to us about dementia and risk factors in general for women specifically. Now, it's clear more knowledge is needed about why more women than men are diagnosed with dementia, but it's heartening to know that we can take some steps to protect our brain health. At the close of our first webinar, we polled our audience to hear what people want to know in terms of women's brain health. And overwhelmingly, there was an interest in prevention, specifically understanding how nutrition plays a part in preventing and delaying dementia. So today, being International Women's Day, we're going to talk about what better way to celebrate ourselves and our ability to protect our powerful, beautiful brains. We're glad that you decided to join us to hear about dietary strategies for better brain health. To help us along here, we've invited Dr. Aileen Burford-Mason, and she's a biochemist, an immunologist, and cell biologist. She's also an expert in the field of vitamins and their appropriate use in health maintenance, healthy aging, and prevention and treatment of disease. Dr. Burford-Mason takes a balanced and scientifically based approach. She's known for her ability to take the latest findings in diet and supplement research and translate them into practical evidence-based guidelines. Now, she graduated from the University of College, Dublin, Ireland. She received a Ph.D. in immunology in the UK. She's formerly an assistant professor in the Department of Pathology, Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto. She was a director of a cancer research laboratory at the Toronto General Hospital. She has published many research papers in leading medical and scientific journals, covering diverse medical and scientific areas, including immunology, pathology, gastroenterology, cancer, AIDS, microbiology, and nutrition. And before I hand over the virtual podium to Dr. Burford-Mason, I remind our live audience that if you have questions or comments, please use the chat function of either Zoom or Facebook Live, and we're going to get to those questions a little bit later. Now, Dr. Burford-Mason has generously offered up a copy of 2 of her books for a draw, and we're going to get to that later this evening too, so stay tuned to the end for more information. With that, it is my pleasure to welcome Aileen Burford-Mason to the Dementia Society's Your Brain Health event and to speak to us this evening about dietary strategies for better brain health.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction. It's very nice to be talking to societies like this. I found this is sort of new and invigorating that so many people are coming together to say, okay, we need to know more, teach us. And of course, those of us who love teaching are always very happy to do that. So I want to say, first of all, before I start, one thing that is clear is that the brain is extremely complex. And can I have the next slide? There's a little quote that I love to start with. It says, if the human brain were so simple that we could understand it, we would be so simple that we couldn't. So bear that in mind, that we're doing our best, and with wonderful new technologies, we are able to see more and more into the brain in real time, see what's going on. But there's still things that we will never, well, we will gradually maybe unravel. There's a lot we don't know today. One thing we do know though, next slide please, is, can we have the next slide? Right. The brain is incredibly demanding of nutrition. And before I even talk about nutrition, I want to talk about 2 words. I distinguish quite clearly between diet and nutrition. Diet is simply an inventory of what we eat. It could be a packet of chips and Coca-Cola. That might be your diet. So that word diet says nothing about health. the word nutrition talks about whether what we eat actually nourishes us, actually supports our health. So you should be aware that the brain is what I call a nutrient sinkhole. Basically, it is never satisfied with the amount of nutrition we're giving it. It uses oxygen and glucose, which is its fuel, and all the essential nutrients at 10 times the rate of any other organ or tissue, 10 times the rate of the heart, 10 times the rate of your muscles if you're running a marathon. The brain is using the most nutrition. So you might not be surprised then that it's the first organ in the body to wobble if we're short of any of these essential components it needs for functioning. So what are the essential nutrients? And I'd like to point out that word essential, that's a key word there. Essential means we can't dream them up, we can't make them out of anything else. We have to actually get them into us, either through food and sometimes through supplements. So it includes all the vitamins, the A, all the B vitamins, C, D, E, and there are 8 different forms of E and several different forms of K, all the essential minerals. And then 2 types of fat are essential. This was a great concern with regard to brain health when I kept seeing that message, cut the fat, cut the fat. You know, low fat is good, no fat is even better. Nothing could be further from the truth if you're cutting out the essential fats. So a lot of people cut out the essential fats and kept in the bad fats. So omega-3s and omega-6s, most people may have heard of. And then protein breaks down into amino acids, and 9 of those are essential. Now, the key to understanding how these work in the brain is to realize that they all work together synergistically. They don't work independently. So if you're hoping that I can say there's one magic supplement you can take, you'll be disappointed because that doesn't exist. Every nutrient that we might acquire through diet or take through supplements depends on many cofactors, other nutrients that it interacts with and is interdependent on. So they're working for the brain to function. That's to make the neurotransmitters that help us think and focus and concentrate and remember and sleep. And they're also working to repair our brains and to maintain it. Brains are not just set in concrete. We have to keep maintaining them all the time. Next slide, please. So we know that there are various dietary factors and patterns of eating that do increase the risk. And I can't go into all of these, but I'll just mention some of them. We are going to focus on a few of them today. So diets that are low in protein. In fatty fish, what do we get from the fatty fish? We get both protein, but also those omega-3 fats that our brain needs. That are high in added sugars, they increase risk. And low in, focus here, non-starchy vegetables, not fries and mashed potato, but more the leafy greens and the vibrant colored vegetables. And what are called low GI fruits. GI stands for glycemic index. It's the amount of sugar that the particular food will pour into the blood once you eat it. So all the vitamin deficiencies that have been shown to increase risk, especially vitamin D, the B vitamins, especially B12. There is a form of dementia that is simply B12 deficiency, and it's reversible on discovering the deficiency. And vitamin C and vitamin E, these have all been looked at in terms of risk factor for dementia. And then there are mineral deficiencies that also increase the risk. And when they look in the blood of people with dementia, they find low levels of magnesium, that's almost universal, copper, zinc, iron, selenium. And then many of these nutrients, you just don't need to focus on one because they need to be in balance with another nutrient. And that is true of calcium and magnesium. They need to be in balance. And we are living in a calcium-rich environment and a magnesium-poor environment. So that is something that needs redressing. it's complicated, and I do address it in my books, how to balance calcium and magnesium. Next slide, please. So basically the fuel for the brain, the gas in the tank, if you like, is glucose. Next slide. So it's important to know that it's very easy to upset the brain's balance with glucose. It needs glucose 24/7. You need glucose to sleep at night. Every brain cell uses glucose as energy. And the harder we're working our brain, the quicker the glucose is used up. And therefore it has to be continuously renewed in the brain. Now, when you talk about a hardworking brain, often people will think of, oh, you know, I'm doing an extra exam, or I've got a new job and I'm really having to get to grips with a lot of tough stuff. It could be, though, working the hard brain could be ruminating over an argument or a messy divorce, or worrying about COVID, or any of those things that, you know, get our brains working and thinking harder, will actually deplete the brain of glucose. So we need this continuous supply. Next slide, please. So here's the paradox. Too much sugar handicaps the brain. High sugar intake actually depletes the brain of sugar, deprives it. And here's the reason why. High sugar in your blood is damaging to your tissues. You don't want high blood sugar. And you can raise your blood sugar too high with a glass of orange juice. A glass of orange juice is the equivalent of 10 teaspoons of sugar. So basically, quaff back a glass of orange juice and you've pushed your blood sugar up high. What that will stimulate, because it's damaging to our tissues, is your pancreas to make insulin. Now, insulin is our storage hormone. It is probably the most important hormone in the body. Even in the ocean, little tiny unicellular creatures use insulin to store minerals inside their little cells. So what insulin does is it takes the sugar out of the blood, shunts it into cells where it gets converted into fat. But now you see blood sugar has dropped. So blood sugar goes up, shoots up high, insulin goes up to get rid of it, blood sugar drops like a stone. What happens? The brain says, I can't function like that. Now this can be, they talk about sugar addiction, and it's not a true addiction, but it mimics addiction, if you like, because if the brain tells you that you've just depleted it of sugar using orange juice, maybe it's saying to have another glass of orange juice. If you've depleted sugar using, you know, eating 3 cookies, maybe the brain's saying eat the whole packet. And you keep on having this surge of sugar followed by a surge of insulin followed by a drop in sugar. So that is why a low sugar diet is essential. Actually, we do talk, and we're not joking when we say sugar is probably the new smoking. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, whereas you might be able to say, oh yes, I've given up sugar. I don't put sugar in my tea. I've stopped eating candies. I'm not eating foods that have a lot of sugar in them, like cookies and muffins. But it's not just sugar. Next slide. The bad news is that starchy foods like rice and pasta and bread and potatoes, these starchy foods may not taste sweet, but they're long chains of glucose molecules. So actually, they don't become sugar till you digest them, but they still have the same action. They will push up your blood sugar too high. I think people are so shocked when they realize the sugar content of, or the sugar equivalent, shall we say, of some of the foods we eat, especially breakfast cereals. It was interesting, I was amused on Twitter recently where a dietitian, she posted, am I the only dietitian in the world who doesn't recommend oatmeal for breakfast? So oatmeal has this great health halo. but oatmeal is cooked so it can be quickly digested. And so oatmeal, a bowl of oatmeal is the equivalent of 30 teaspoons of sugar, believe it or not. If you put 30 teaspoons of sugar in front of somebody, nobody could eat them. And that's because the brain tastes the sugar and immediately reacts and says, no, that's not good for me. But by the time the brain knows you've eaten sugar in the form of starch, it's too late, you've already eaten it. So the more refined, the more it's ground up, the quicker the starches and the easier to digest into glucose and the faster they raise blood sugar. So this is the case for, say, soft white bread. That's very quick to convert into sugar. And the more something's cooked or ground, it'll be quicker to raise blood sugar. Next slide, please. So the starchy foods, as I said, are like bread, potatoes, rice, pasta, muffins, cookies, cakes, etc. They have a high glycemic index, which I've mentioned before. That means they push up blood sugar high and fast. But we forget, sometimes people come to my office and they say, you know, I eat a low carbohydrate diet. And I say, I really hope you don't, because I'll be encouraging to eat a high carbohydrate diet. But they forget, or they never knew, that vegetables and fruit are also carbohydrates. And those are the ones that we want to encourage. Most of them have a low glycemic index, but that is in their whole form, not in juice. So you would eat an orange rather than have a glass of orange juice. And so they supply, because they break down slowly and they have all their fiber, etc., they will release sugar slowly into the brain and continuously. So this is what we want to do. I call vegetables and fruit the smart carbs. Next slide, please. I love this quote, and this is from David Ludwig, who's a professor at Harvard School of Public Health. And he said, you can have a bowl of cornflakes with no extra sugar added. Next slide. Or a bowl of sugar with no extra cornflakes. They might taste different, but biologically they're comparable. They do the same stuff in the body. Now that's a big shock, particularly in North America, where, you know, breakfast in a box is traditional. You start the day with cereal. What else? So next slide, please. I want to also mention, and this is where there's some very good research, that if your blood sugar is fluctuating, if it's going up and going down and going up and going down, that can produce anxiety. And there are studies to show this can certainly make a difference when you stabilize blood sugar through your diet. So this is the next slide. Hypoglycemia, that is low blood sugar. The symptoms of low blood sugar are depression, anxiety, irritability, difficulty sleeping, and even weepiness. They can be caused by two things. One, not eating. If you don't eat, obviously, your blood sugar is going to go low. But they also can be caused by eating too much sugar and or starch. So either ends of the extreme, you're going to produce these depression, anxiety in particular. And lots of people have difficulty sleeping, and often it's really incorrect diets that are leading to that. Next slide. So this is the question then. How can we keep up with the brain's demand for glucose? Remember, especially if we're working hard, so Julie, for example, will be put on the spot when she's reporting, or there's breaking news and you've got to be on your toes. You're working your brain hard. So what can you eat that will keep you going? It's very tempting to run for the donut. It feels good, and the blood sugar that it produces lasts for about 5 seconds flat before you drain the brain of sugar. So I want everyone to focus on the colorful fruits and vegetables instead. Next slide. So this is one of the dietary patterns. In Alzheimer's now and dementias, we're looking at what dietary patterns either protect or enhance the risk of brain deterioration. So the first one I want to talk about is inadequate intake of vegetables and fruit. Next slide. So minimally processed, this is what I'm talking about, not juices, etc. Vegetables and whole grains digest slowly after eating. I want to focus on whole grains. There's a big difference between, say, a side of brown rice with your dinner in the evening. That's a whole grain. But when you grind up that brown rice and make it into a cracker, that is different in the body. That is more likely to push up blood sugar. So whole grains should be whole. So they digest slowly after eating, and then they provide the steady input of glucose into the brain between meals, from one meal to the next. They don't send insulin soaring. They won't trigger a drop in your blood sugar. But there's a bonus. There's a really serious bonus, and that is those color pigments and the chemicals that give them aroma and flavor are also very important for brain health. We call those phytochemicals. They're just chemicals that come from plants, and they have a huge role to play in protecting the brain. They're antioxidants, etc. So next slide, please. So they're only there in trace amounts. And as I said, you know they're there because they give color, they give smell, and they give taste. And what they are is powerful antimicrobials. So they fight infection, but they also balance out. I'm sure people have heard that a lot of our health is based on our microbiome, this world of bugs that lives in our gut and on our skin, etc. And that when that's out of balance, it affects not only our physical health, but our mental health as well. So basically, they are powerful antimicrobials, keep those bugs in check. They're antioxidants, they protect tissues from damage, and they're also detoxifiers. They detox us from environmental chemicals. So we need to take a high intake of these daily for optimal health and functioning. And I'm talking about optimal here because, you know, I think most people now are interested in optimizing their health rather than, oh, it's just good enough. If it's just good enough, you could be an accident waiting to happen. So what we talk about now is 400 to 600 grams a day of vegetables and fruits combined. It's not one or and the of each. And they're both linked to decreased risks of cancer, heart disease, and chronic diseases of aging, including dementia. Now, that translates into what Health Canada now says, 8 to 10 servings of fruit and vegetables a day. If you have that 5 a day fixed in your brain, forget it. It was never optimal for health. And it was known not to be optimal for health. It was 5 a day is appropriate for children between the ages of 4 and 8. Now, if that sounds daunting, 8 to 10 a day, what it really means is you need to know what a serving size is. So half a cup of vegetables or chopped up fruit, a piece of fruit that's about the size of a baseball, or if it's leafy greens, it's a whole cup. Now, we are not talking Starbucks size cups. We're talking about measuring cups that you use for cooking. They're quite small. So you'd be surprised, actually, if you really counted it. And in my first book, Eat Well, Age Better, I actually have a diary card that you can keep and just see where you're getting to in terms of fruits and vegetables intake. Next slide, please. So this is a scientific review. Food for thought, the role of dietary flavonoids, these are these phytochemicals, in enhancing human memory, learning, and neurocognitive performance. So these phytochemicals, remember, herbs and spices, they may have no calories, no protein, or no fat. But what they do have is color, aroma, flavor. And so therefore, they're powerhouses of these phytochemicals. And this review article shows all the work that shows that these phytochemicals improve memory, protect vulnerable neurons. Supposing you accidentally fell and banged your head, or you had a concussion because you're playing hockey. Basically, the more of these circulating phytochemicals you have, the less damage you're likely to do and the quicker you'll recover. They enhance existing neuronal function, how the brain cells are actually working. And then they stimulate neuronal regeneration, how the nerve cells replace themselves should there be an injury. Next slide. Okay, what does Health Canada say? Eat more fruits and vegetables. What did your mother say? And your grandmother say? Eat more fruits and vegetables. I mean, we've known this instinctively for a long time. Now we have the scientific proof. So they talk about apples, pears, berries, peaches, broccoli, cabbage, leafy greens. These are all foods that have been well studied and have a low GI, a low glycemic index. They don't push up blood sugar. Fruit juice and fruit juice concentrates are high in sugars. Health Canada says replace juice with water, choose whole or cut vegetables and fruit instead of juice. So that's what our guidelines say now. Next slide, please. This is very important and very, very seldom emphasized. So you're trying to enhance all of these phytochemicals by increasing the number of servings of fruits and vegetables you eat every day. They are not absorbed without a source of fat. Now, this leads me back to those days when we were encouraged to have fat-free salad dressing. Imagine that you were going to eat a nice big salad, and what do you put on it? A fat-free salad dressing. So I was talking to a group of dietitians, and I showed them a study that had just come out, and I was looking to see if the phytochemicals from the orange-yellow pigments, the carotenoids, they're very, very powerful antioxidants and very important for brain and eye health. And they had them in 3 salads. With one had 0 fat salad dressing, the other had fat reduced, and the third had full fat. Now, full fat doesn't mean a huge amount of fat because you don't want to drown a salad in fat. It's not very attractive. So it's just, but the fat needed to be there. With 0 fat dressing, 0 of the phytochemicals were absorbed. With fat reduced, a little bit more, but you needed the full fat salad dressing for full absorption of these phytochemicals. So for most meals, there's usually a source of fat. But try and think, if you're trying to bump up your intake and you're going to take an apple as a snack, try and think of a way of enhancing that in terms of how you might get more nutrition out of it. You'd have it with a small piece of cheese, or you'd cut it up and put a bit of almond butter on it, or something like that. So it's when you eat them in isolation with no source of fat that you're shortchanging yourself. Next slide, please. So this is the second thing I wanted to talk to you about today, because obviously this is a huge topic to cover in a short time. So the second dietary pattern that undermines brain health is inadequate protein intake. So next slide, please. This is actually, there is a great deal of controversy about protein at the moment. There is a movement that is pushing away from protein. I want to show you the summary points and consensus recommendations from an international summit on protein needs, bringing together all the researchers that are using modern, up-to-date methods to see how much in the way of protein we actually need. So our current advice is you need 0.8 of a gram per kilogram of body weight per day. That, this committee says, is too low for what? Bones, the most important component of bone, the basic structure of bone, is protein. And for healthy bones, the research says we need 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight per day. That's a 50% increase. And then if we want to lose weight and maintain our weight loss, we need somewhere between 1.2 and 1.6 grams. And over 70 years of age, protein needs increase. although it's very customary for people to reduce their protein intake. So basically they said in this consensus summit, animal protein was more efficiently used than plant protein, and it contradicted the advice to reduce animal protein and increase plant proteins. So protein needed to be, here's one thing, when you hear people say something like, well, North Americans eat too much protein, usually when people say that, there's a grain of truth in it. And the grain of truth is that North Americans ate too much protein at one meal. There's a threshold above which you can't metabolize protein. And if you go above that, so you sit down to the 10-ounce steak, what happens to the excess? It doesn't just disappear in a puff of smoke. Something has to happen to it. Well, believe it or not, it gets metabolized first into sugar, and then that gets converted into fat. So you can push up your blood sugar with excess protein. So if you want to keep your protein content optimal, you divide it between 3 meals. So you eat smaller amounts, but 3 meals a day. And so 20 to 30 grams for the average person is appropriate. By the way, those people who do very, very high-powered exercise, they generally need more, and people who are very sick need more. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? So what that does when you eat at each meal, it maximizes protein synthesis in the muscles. So you stay strong. And you know, this is one of the problems we see with aging people, that their muscles get weak. They get something called sarcopenia, where the muscles deteriorate. That leads to weakness and falls, etc. So eating the right amount of protein at each meal will maximize the protein synthesis in the muscle. And also, we need protein to be digested into its amino acids, because they're the raw materials, they're the building blocks for important neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, hormones like insulin and thyroxine. All of the molecules of the immune system, including antibodies, are protein molecules. We don't store any of those. We have to make them as we need them, on demand. So that's another reason for eating a continuous high quality protein at each meal. So here's the deal. You can't store protein, nor do you store any of these molecules. And because those molecules are critical for us to survive, if you didn't make dopamine and serotonin, your heart wouldn't work, your digestive system wouldn't work, never mind your brain. So you have to get those amino acids from somewhere. And what you do is you break down muscles to provide that. And those muscles will never grow back again. So basically, you can weaken the body through cannibalizing yourself, really, in a way, to provide these amino acids. So if people are sick, there's one thing always to remember. Forget about all the other foods if they don't feel like eating. Get them some protein in each 2 or 3 times a day, either as a smoothie or, you know, even one of these commercial high protein drinks, just to get the protein in there. Don't neglect it. Next slide. So does brain function slow down when amino acids it needs for neurotransmitter synthesis are not available? Well, yes, the answer is yes. Show me the next slide. Dopamine is what we're talking about. And dopamine is a powerful aid to learning. We never stop learning, of course. It controls mood and focus and concentration. And guess what? Word recall, and not just word recall, but articulation, how you string the words together to express yourself. So it's made from an amino acid called tyrosine, and it's plentiful in quickly digested protein food. So you can get it in your diet, but there's a problem with dopamine. When we're stressed, we're using it up all the time. To do what? To make 2 stress hormones called noradrenaline and adrenaline. So if you think about it, it's like dopamine needs to be high in the brain for us to function well, but then we're stressed and our adrenal glands are dragging that dopamine away to make adrenal hormones. If we have plenty of tyrosine circulating in our blood, we can replace the dopamine. And so we're still stressed, but we don't feel it. Because when dopamine goes low, your mood goes low, your focus and concentration is not good, your word recall is abysmal, you search for how to express yourself and you say, I didn't say that properly. By the way, also dopamine is involved in fine motor skills, so you might be a bit clumsy. Or if you're playing golf, you might be all over the place and not putt your golf balls properly. Okay, so next slide. And this is just a paper that came out in 2019, again, food for thought. The association between dietary tyrosine and cognitive performance in both young and old. This is showing there's areas of nutrition where it doesn't matter what age you are. If you're not supplying the right raw materials to the brain, you will see a change in function. So they gave a largest number of older and also some younger adults. They looked at their diet to see how much tyrosine there was in it, and then they gave them a battery of tests. What they found was there was better working memory and what's called fluid intelligence, how you problem solve, if there was higher dietary tyrosine. And it didn't matter whether it was older people or younger people. And they said the strongest links were between cognition and the amount of meat products consumed in both young and older age groups. Now, I throw that out there because there is such a strong move to move away from meat and really to just focus on plant-based meats, plant-based foods, plant-based meats too, or meat-like foods. These are very high glycemic foods. They're starchy, so they are increasing your sugar intake, but they have a lot less protein in them. So for example, a chicken breast might give you 25 to 30 grams of protein. To get the same amount of protein with chickpeas or lentils, you have to eat about 3.5 to 4 cups. Nobody eats that. And so what happens is people eat less. They think they're getting enough protein, but they're not. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to show you this because I think it's really neat. And it's really going back to 2003. Wertzmann's group at MIT first showed that how we thought and how our brain functioned depended on the way we ate at our previous meal. And that was a big surprise, but it hasn't really caught on as much as it should have. So he talked about the effects of normal meals rich in carbohydrates or proteins on tryptophan and tyrosine. Now, tryptophan is what you need for sleep, which you don't need during the day. It makes you sleepy and clumsy during the day. It's great when you're going to bed, but it's not good during the day. So they compared 2 breakfasts, a high sugar starch, which was pancakes, syrup, orange juice, and coffee with sugar. And then they had a high protein breakfast, which was turkey bacon, egg beaters. Don't ask me why they didn't use real eggs, grapefruit sections, cheese, and butter. And what they found was after the first breakfast, but not the second, insulin rose significantly. So you know, we've talked about what happens when insulin goes high, sugar goes low. So brain is not functioning so well. So they said high starch and sugar meal raised blood levels of tryptophan relative to tyrosine. So more sleepiness, less focus. And they said the net effect of breakfast one would be increased brain serotonin, decreased focus and concentration, increased daytime sleepiness. So how we eat has a huge impact on how we function throughout the day. But then as we get older, and if we're only supplying, there are people who are really only supplying their brain with the equivalent of breakfast one. They really are doing that all the time. No wonder thinking skills deteriorate. Next slide, please. So 2 take-home messages, if I can summarize from today. First of all, swap out sugar and much of your starchy carbs for vegetables and fruit, not as fruit juices, but in their whole form. You wouldn't believe the amount of additional energy you get out of that. And then try and find ways to include more protein, even if it's a smoothie with a scoop of protein powder in it, at each meal. Don't forget protein at breakfast. We have kept our protein for dinner time. We've ignored breakfast and lunch. And, it's great to function well after dinner, but wouldn't it be nice to function well after breakfast and lunch as well? So don't forget that. So next slide, please. Just to tell you, you can read a lot more about all of this in 3 books that I've written: Eat Well, Age Better. The Healthy Brain is really focusing on brain, and I think this audience will enjoy that. And then my latest book is called The War Against Viruses. I thank you very much for your attention. It's a complicated and complex topic to discuss, but I think we have to start the discussion on how we're starving our brain through inadequate nutrition.
Thank you very much. That's fascinating. I myself have all kinds of questions, and I know that people have been writing madly questions in the chat as well. So we have lots that we can ask you in the next few minutes, and people can ask questions in French and English, I understand. And for any Dementia Society inquiries, we also have Wendy Grimshaw, who is the CEO of the Dementia Society, or Kate Holmes, Director of Development. So I think we will get to some of those questions now. I've been trying to write some of them down, but I know that I see some more coming into the chat room right now. So people actually had some questions about if you can have copies of the slides. So I should just repeat that the event is being recorded and will be uploaded on the Dementia Society's YouTube channel, and it will also be sent out to all participants. So yes, you will be able to see this again and hear it again. So there's been a lot of concentration on breakfast here. And so a lot of the questions that are coming up are wanting to know about breakfast. We always have heard that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. What would you say, ideally, so many of us do eat oatmeal or some sort of a cereal, and even if we don't put sugar on it, we were thinking that we were doing the right thing. What would you suggest is the best breakfast meal for us?
If you look at other societies, if you look at continental Europe, for example, I remember going to Germany a lot, and they would start the day with boiled eggs, cheese, cold cuts, some fruit, and the old thick black pumpernickel bread. That's one of the breads that's slowest to push up blood sugar, and so that would be their breakfast, a great start to the day. I grew up in Ireland, where basically, bacon and eggs and something called black and white pudding, which I didn't like growing up, but we'd always have vegetables with that. We'd have grilled tomatoes, we'd have grilled mushrooms with that. So that would be a breakfast. I think today it's understandable why we went the cereal route, because we're very busy and it's an easy way to start the day. When we talk about oatmeal, I'm sure some of you have heard of something called overnight oats, where people soak oats. They're not cooked. And then you get the benefits, and there are benefits from oats, phytochemicals in there, but you don't get the disadvantage of them pushing sugar up too fast because they're not cooked. They break down slowly. And so there's recipes like Swiss muesli, where you start off with yogurt and you add some fruit and some nuts for crunch. The brain, by the way, loves crunch, and it raises brain serotonin levels. So anything crunchy in our breakfast we love. And you can work on a breakfast like that. I've had people come to me, and I actually saw it one day. I turned on the TV and Dr. Oz was on, and he was talking about the new fashion of dinner for breakfast. So people will tell me, I have leftover dinner for breakfast. So I think it's a big change in our thinking, though, because we've got at least 4 generations of North Americans have been brought up on cereal alone.
Right. Well, okay. I'm glad you brought that up about other ways of eating oatmeal, because I think that was some of the questions that were asked. If we didn't cook our oatmeal, then it would be okay. Then
it's different.
Add fruit, add yogurt, fresh fruit, that kind of thing. But I do have a question, because I've traveled in Asia, in Korea and Japan, and I'm just wondering about rice, because very often in Asia they will have white rice for breakfast.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean they function particularly well on it.
Okay, so not a recommendation.
No, I'm not recommending it at all. No.
Okay. So there have been some questions also about, you talked about fresh fruit and raw vegetables and the importance of that, but also people are talking about homemade soups. We do live in Canada and we go through winter, and so that is a big way that a lot of us get our vegetables, is through soups.
Okay.
Cooking vegetables.
So that's really a good question, because you are processing it. It depends on the soup. I mean, I'm a great soup lover as well, but basically, the chunkier the soup, the better. There's nothing better for us than a good old-fashioned chicken soup with chicken in it and chunky vegetables, and this is very good for us. But when you take, say, if you take a carrot soup or a potato soup and you've pulverized the whole thing, it really is instant sugar as soon as it hits the digestive tract. So I think the form is important.
Okay, that's good to know. There's a question about, can we make up deficiencies with diet, or should people take supplements?
Okay, I remember a talk I was giving at Women's College, again for some Women's Health Day, and a doctor asked me at the end, do we need, because I talked about supplements, do we need supplements because our diets, the food has deteriorated? And I said, yes, food surely has deteriorated. We can show that as crops have been, obtained from the same ground over and over again, there's less minerals in there, etc. And we can see that and we can prove it. But in medicine, there's, the buzz term is evidence-based. And I said, if you want the least evidence-based statement you could make, is we used to get everything we needed from our diets, didn't we? And the answer is, how do you know? No, we waltzed from one deficiency to another. There were deficiencies of something in one area. Depending on our food supply, we got a lot of what we needed, but maybe not enough of certain things. So at the moment, the approach, if you're going to take supplements, you need to do it in a scientific way, because you're using more science, understanding more of the science of the brain and what it actually needs. So the other thing to say is there's a recommended daily intake for each of those essential nutrients. And if we don't meet it, having a recommended daily intake means there's a consequence if we don't meet those needs. And the consequence is poorer health. So how do you know? I'll ask you, Kate, directly. How do you know that you have, when you go to bed at night, met your daily requirement for every single vitamin and mineral? You don't know, and nobody could know. It's really a concept that is sort of like, it's a duh. How do I know that? How do we calculate it? It's impossible. Some people will go to great lengths to look at computer programs with great spreadsheets and things where they say, oh, I'm a bit short of zinc that day and a little bit. Well, the other thing to know is that the recommended daily intake is now considered inadequate to prevent chronic illnesses like dementia. So why are we using it? If it's not enough to prevent chronic illness, it's really not adequate. It's adequate to keep us alive and not obviously showing signs of deficiency, but it's not really supporting health, and particularly brain health concerns me. And just remember, if you remember nothing else from this presentation, the demands of the brain are so much higher than any other organ in the body.
How about salt? We've discussed sugar quite a bit, and there's a question about any concerns about salt, and considering we know salt has an impact on high blood pressure.
Yes, well, salt is an essential, sodium chloride is salt. Both sodium and chloride are essential minerals. And in nature, they're rather rare, and we have a desire for them. So in a natural diet, in a hunter-gatherer diet, for example, there wouldn't be a lot of salt. So salt was highly prized. We can see that in the animals when the deer come out of the woods in the winter and lick the salt off the road. There's an urge to take in salt. Now, salt has to be regulated by other nutrients, and the most important one is magnesium. And so if magnesium is deficient, then salt will be a problem. If magnesium is not deficient, but it is for a lot of people, then salt is not so much of an issue. And in fact, the salt that we're really concerned about is not sodium chloride, the salt that's on the table that you put on your food. We're concerned about monosodium glutamate, which you get in processed foods, that flavor enhancer. So if you're eating daily at fast food outlets, you're probably getting too much salt, but it won't be sodium chloride, it'll be monosodium glutamate. So once you cut out the junk foods and the fast food and the processed foods, then probably you don't have to worry much about salt. Once you have your a good magnesium intake, then you really can't get enough magnesium from diet. I think everybody needs to take a small magnesium supplement on a daily basis. Will do nobody any harm, and a lot of good. But high blood pressure is known to be a magnesium deficiency.
There's also a question in regards to diabetes. Is everything you're saying about diet applicable for someone who has diabetes?
Absolutely. It doesn't matter whether it's type 1, which is an autoimmune disorder where there's destruction of the cells that make insulin, or type 2, which is overloading the body on a very ongoing basis with sugar and starch, and ending up unable to use insulin, what we call insulin resistant and type 2 diabetes. Absolutely, this diet is the only diet that reverses type 2 diabetes, and it reverses it. It's not a question of stopping it progressing, it reverses it. It's really remarkable to me that there's a resistance to this idea, because if you think that you have a disease that's caused by high blood sugar and high insulin, wouldn't the first thing you do be say, well, what foods do I eat that pushes up my blood sugar and my insulin? And maybe I should cut those out. Then I wouldn't have this problem. So there are some doctors, and they call themselves low carb doctors and dietitians, but low carb, as I tried to stress early on, I don't like that term, because is it low carb when you don't have fruits and vegetables? Fruits and vegetables are carbs too. So low starchy carbs, we should call it. But there's one doctor in England, actually some of your listeners might be interested in this, a doctor called David Unwin, U-N-W-I-N. He has a YouTube channel, and he's won all sorts of awards for converting everyday foods into teaspoons of sugar. And they're nice, pictograms. So a picture is the equivalent of 1,000 words. It's really interesting to have a look and see, oh my God, I thought that was good for me. And look how many teaspoons of sugar it converts to. So that might be fun for people to look up those slides. So just if you just Google him, his YouTube channel will come up. So, you know, really and truly, type 2 diabetes is, if I was being really harsh, and I don't mean to be harsh, I'd say it's self-inflicted. It's not self-inflicted if you weren't aware that what you were doing was going to end up with disease. The problem is we're not being encouraged to think enough about our biology and our physiology. It seems too difficult. Let somebody else deal with that. So if we start to understand how our bodies work and how we use food for maintenance and growth and repair and functioning, you know, then it becomes, I think, more easy to say, well, there's food out there that I really like the taste of, but I just know now that it does me no good. It pushes my blood sugar up, and then the doctor sees it in my blood tests and is all worried. And the next thing, I'm on a cascade of drugs, one after the other. You can do something yourself about it. It's absolutely if anybody has type 2 diabetes, I would say explore a low starchy carb diet, and you'll be amazed at the response.
We have many more questions. Kate, do we have time for to continue, or should we move on to this survey?
Why don't we do the survey? Anyone who needs to drop off can, and maybe we could impose upon Aileen to stay on a little bit longer for a couple more questions after.
Sorry, I have a few. Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we really want to have your feedback to understand how the Dementia Society is doing and where it can go next. So if you can take some time for the online Zoom survey about this evening's event, that would be great. And to thank you for your participation, the Dementia Society will be drawing the names of 3 registrants who will each receive a book. And 2 of the books are Dr. Burford-Mason's. One book is The War Against Viruses, How the Science of Optimal Nutrition Can Help You Win. And the second is her book, The Healthy Brain, Optimize Brain Power at Any Age. The third book is Dr. Antoine Hakim's book, Save Your Mind, 7 Rules to Avoid Dementia. So if you can take that survey, and then we'll take some time. We'll go back and ask a couple more questions, because I know that there are many more questions that are have been in both the chat room and the Q&A. And of course, I had my own questions, but I'll have to get the book myself and answer some of those. So should I go ahead and ask some questions as people take the poll? Okay. There was an interesting one here in the Q&A section. I'm going to scroll to, here it is. Okay, so this question is, are there gender differences between men and women when it comes to brain health and nutrition? What recommendations do you have for picky eaters, or those whose family members are picky eaters and don't like the taste of vegetables or fruit? How can we support them eat more vegetables and fruit without reverting to smoothies or cold pressed juices? So that's actually 2 questions. The one about the difference between men and women, and then the idea of how to help picky eaters.
Okay, well, there are differences in the brain function, or even in nutritional needs between men and women. One that stands out for me, I've mentioned magnesium before. I'm sometimes called the magnesium whisperer, because in the brain, it uses, as I said, 10 times more magnesium than any other organ. But there are 3 signs of ongoing magnesium deficiency in the brain: anxiety, depression, and insomnia. And you see that, and you see them occur together. Now, it's interesting that women, because of their high estrogen levels, estrogen helps women absorb magnesium and utilize it, so they can get more out of their diet and use it properly. And you see what happens to women as they start to lose estrogen and they go through perimenopause and menopause. What happens? They get anxious, they get insomnia, they get depressed and weepy. So, and then they get hot flashes, which are also a sign of magnesium deficiency. So basically, that would be a difference, and that's hormonally driven between men and women. I think there's very much a difference in the way men and women in the general society view diet. Women tend to be much more open to learning about diet and care about their diet a bit more. They are the caregivers. They're the caregivers. They're the ones that usually prepare the food, although I think that's changing quite a lot. My son is a cook in his house. So basically, you know, you do see differences both in the socialization with regard to food and also in the hormonal balances that differ between men and women.
When you talk about magnesium, and this is a question that did come up, but because you've repeated the magnesium suggestion, is there a amount of magnesium you suggest on a daily intake?
You see, that's a very interesting question as well. And it's just like, you know, these Russian dolls where you open one and there's another one inside and you keep going. And that's the case with nutrition. So magnesium, there is not a blood test for magnesium that is reliable. Because magnesium relaxes muscles, it's essential to keep blood level steady, because remember, the heart is a muscle. So what will happen if blood level drops just momentarily, you'll scoop the magnesium out of your bones. There's a large amount of magnesium in bone, which people draw on for years before they run out. It weakens the bones, but at least they supply the magnesium. So magnesium relaxes muscles after they contract. And so the gut is a muscle. If you took too much, you would over-relax the gut. And I don't need to tell you what would happen. If you over-relaxed your gut, you're going to end up with loose stools or diarrhea. And this leads me to say that the added complication to needing all these 40 nutrients together at the same time, like all the working parts of your car together at the same time, is that there's genetic differences between one individual and another in the amount that they need. So what I usually recommend for magnesium, although there's more details in my books, is that you take the recommended daily amount for your age group, which you can find on the internet, what's called the daily requirement, and take that as a supplement. If it's too much for you, and it's just possible it might be, you'll get a bit of loose stools, and so you back off and reduce the dose. And you take the minimum dose, you take the maximum dose that won't cause diarrhea, basically. So, but everyone should take, I think, the daily recommended allowance. Just for a few people, it might be a bit too much, and then they get loose stools. All that means is back off a little.
Okay. Kate, should we, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for staying on and answering more questions. And of course, we had many more questions because it was a very interesting discussion and presentation, and it's food for thought on its own, right? The Dementia Society is going to be in touch about the next events in the Your Brain Health series. So do stay tuned. But thank you so much, Dr. Burford-Mason. And thank you for everyone for taking the time out here on International Women's Day to learn about how to protect brain health. Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.